All right, so ready to dive into some philosophy?
Let's do it.
Today, we're tackling Nietzsche,
Nietzsche.
Beyond Good and Evil,
Yeah,
which,
big one.
it's one of those books that makes you kind of question everything you thought you knew,
It's not even just questioning. It's like the why behind, like, why do we believe the things we believe? And Nietzsche really wants us to go beyond these surface level assumptions about good and evil.
Yeah.
Which is why I think this deep dive is going to be so
Yeah.
written.
Yeah, and we've got excerpts from the intro and like some key sections of Beyond Good and Evil lined up, right?
No, and I think, honestly, even for somebody who thinks that they've got Nietzsche figured out, this book can still throw you for a loop. He
Totally.
still has some surprises up his sleeve.
That's the thing about Nietzsche is he hits you with these like aphorisms, these potent little thought grenades that really kind of like explode your assumptions,
Totally.
And he comes right out swinging at philosophy itself, right? He's
Yeah.
like, this isn't just some pure
Yeah.
search for truth, right?
It's like he's calling philosophers out.
Yeah.
He's saying every philosopher has a dog in the fight. Like, what are you really trying to say here? What are you trying to justify, maybe even to yourself, with these big ideas?
So we should be asking, like when we're reading Beyond Good and Evil, or frankly, anything philosophical,
Yeah.
what does this philosopher really want?
What do they want?
Like, what are they trying to, like,
Yeah.
to justify?
What's the hidden agenda?
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like, and not even consciously. Maybe they're not even aware of it, but
Totally.
that's what he's trying to pick at.
And if philosophy is that personal, then this idea of going beyond good and evil,
Right.
that's not just some abstract
Right.
concept.
It's not just some intellectual exercise.
Right.
Right. This is him saying, like, this is how we should be living. And to be fair to Nietzsche, he's not saying throw out all morality.
Right.
It's not, anything goes. It's more, I think, of like, let's call it upgrading our moral operating system. We've inherited all these very simplistic binaries, good, bad, right, wrong.
Yeah.
But like, who decided on those? Who benefits from those?
Yeah, how do we reevaluate those labels then?
And he gives us this framework, and this is where it makes people uncomfortable. Master morality versus slave morality.
Right, that's classic Nietzsche.
Right.
Always love a good power dynamic.
Of course. Because for Nietzsche, morality is intimately connected to power. He says that master morality, this is all about strength, nobility, achievement. It's this dominant force that creates its own values.
So the masters define good as whatever serves their interests, whatever advances their aims and their goals. It's a very assertive
Very much so.
way of looking at things.
And then you have slave morality, which he says arises from resentment. It's those who feel powerless. They flip the script. They look at what the masters value, the strength, the boldness, and they label it as evil.
And instead praise humility and compassion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which isn't to say those are bad qualities inherently. But for Nietzsche, it becomes a way for the less powerful to cope, to find meaning in a system that they perceive as being stacked against them.
And it makes you wonder if morality really is this fluid thing that's tied to these power struggles. What happens when the ultimate source of power, of moral authority, is gone?
Well, that is where we get Nietzsche's most infamous statement, God is dead.
Right. And obviously, not talking about like a literal God kicking the bucket, right?
Right.
It's a much bigger,
Much bigger than that.
more unsettling idea.
He's talking about the death of those absolute truths, those traditional systems that people rely on for meaning, for moral guidance. Like, what happens to morality in a world where those systems are crumbling?
It's like pulling the foundation out from under the entire building, Like some people are going to be terrified.
Rightfully so. But Nietzsche also saw this as an incredible opportunity.
Okay.
Because into that void, into that absence of predetermined values, steps the free spirit.
Okay.
And I think this is where things get really interesting for our deep dive. It's not even just freedom from something.
Right.
It's freedom to create, to reevaluate, to define your own terms.
Yeah.
That's the essence of this free spirit, I think, for Nietzsche.
Okay. So that sounds great in theory, right?
Yeah.
But how do you actually live as a free spirit in a world that like often feels anything but free? Like, did he have practical advice, or was it just like...
Well, he gives us clues. And thankfully, our source material, like, kind of digs into that.
Yes.
So, like, he did believe that a free spirit, they're not bound by this herd mentality. They're constantly questioning everything, especially those inherited values that we talked about.
Right.
The ones that we just assume are these universal truths.
It's funny because when I think of like a free spirit, I think of like, the rebellious artist type, the
Yeah.
lone wolf.
Sure.
But it sounds like his definition goes even deeper than just like not conforming.
Oh, much deeper.
Yeah.
Nietzsche wouldn't be impressed by somebody who's just like, bucking social norms just to buck them.
Yeah.
This is about the free spirit is engaged in this constant process of what he calls self-overcoming,
Okay.
right? Always pushing their own boundaries, always questioning their own assumptions.
So it's less about rebelling against the world and more about mastering yourself.
You got it.
Okay.
You got it. It's about recognizing that will to power that he talks about, that he believes drives us all.
Okay, well, let's talk about that because will to power is one of those phrases that when you hear it, you're like,
It's a loaded
it's a loaded term.
It's a loaded term.
And you think, oh, so he's all about brute force and domination.
Right.
But I get the sense that it's a lot more nuanced than that.
Way more nuance. Remember, Nietzsche saw morality, traditional morality, as so often being a tool of the weak to kind of hold back the strong.
Right.
Right. So when he's talking about will to power, he's not just talking about physical strength or even like political control. It's this innate drive within us to grow, to create, to overcome.
So it's less about conquering others and more about like conquering yourself, reaching your full potential, however you define that.
Exactly. And this is where things get really interesting because he doesn't see this will to power as just this individual thing. It plays out on a societal level too. He would argue that societies that try to suppress this drive, that push for absolute equality and sameness, they're essentially weakening themselves.
So no participation trophies for everybody.
Probably not. He believed that, real progress, real greatness comes from acknowledging the differences in talent and ability.
Yeah.
Not trying to pretend like everybody's the same.
Which I could see rubbing a lot of people the wrong way.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially, today when there's such a huge emphasis on equality, on social justice, which are obviously very important things. But I think his point is that like trying to erase all differences can sometimes lead to mediocrity.
Yeah.
You lose that spark, that striving for something more.
And he saw it happening, even back then. He saw this kind of leveling effect.
Right.
And it worried him. And it's not to say that he's advocating for, oppression or exploitation.
Right.
Right. But it's more about recognizing that hierarchy is a natural part of existence.
Right.
And true equality isn't about everybody being the same.
It's about having the opportunity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To fulfill your own potential.
Okay.
Whatever that may be.
So where does beyond good and evil fit into all of this?
Right.
Because we're talking about power, we're talking about potential, and it almost seems like, well, anything goes if you're strong enough.
And that's, I think, a common misconception.
Okay.
Nietzsche actually had a very strong sense of morality. It just wasn't the traditional kind. He called it the morality of the noble soul.
Okay. Let's unpack that a little bit because
Yeah.
noble soul sounds very
It sounds very high-minded.
high-minded. Yeah, exactly.
And this is where I think understanding Nietzsche's background helps. He was a huge fan of the ancient Greeks, particularly their concept of the hero.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So we're talking about like Odysseus, Achilles.
Exactly. They weren't perfect. They weren't saints.
Right.
But they were courageous. They were ambitious. They strove for greatness.
Yeah.
And that's what he saw as noble.
So it's not about being nice in the traditional sense.
Not necessarily. It's about having this inner strength, this willingness to confront challenges head on, to define your own values, even in the face of adversity. That's what he means by beyond good and evil.
Yeah.
It's about transcending those easy categories and forging your own path.
Wow. It's funny because I'm starting to see why Nietzsche is still so relevant today.
Yeah.
Even though, he was writing over a century ago.
Right.
This whole idea of like, noble souls, forging your own path.
Yeah.
It's very kind of individualistic, self-made,
Right.
which we see so much of today.
And the anxieties that come with that too.
Totally.
Right? Because it's one thing to say, oh yeah, I admire those people, the ones that forge their own path, that challenge conventions.
Right.
But to actually be that person,
Yeah.
terrifying for a lot of people.
Well, because it's like you're taking responsibility, right?
Yeah.
For not just for your actions, but for your beliefs, for your values.
Exactly.
That's a lot.
It is. It's a heavy burden.
Yeah. It makes you wonder, like, did he think everyone was capable of being this noble soul?
Right.
Or is it just like some people are just hardwired for it?
Right. And that's where things get even more interesting, I think, because
Yeah.
while he believed in this potential for greatness within us, he also recognized that not everybody's going to embrace it.
Right.
In fact, he worried about what happens when you try to force it.
It's like trying to create a society where everyone's a superhero.
Right.
Like it seems like a recipe for disaster.
It's not going to work. And remember, his issue with slave morality was not that he thought like compassion was bad or empathy was bad or these are bad things in and of themselves.
Right.
It's that they can be used to suppress ambition,
Yeah.
to hold back those who want to excel.
It's like the nail that sticks out gets hammered down.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
He was worried that a society that tries to make everyone equal ends up just dragging everyone down.
You got it. You got it.
Yeah.
And in the process, you lose that drive. You lose that creative spark
Right.
that he thought really pushes humanity forward.
Okay, so if we're gonna wrap up this deep dive, like with some kind of actionable takeaway,
Yeah.
what would Nietzsche say to someone listening right now who's maybe a little fired up
Yeah.
by all this talk of will to power, noble soul?
Right. Because it's one thing to grasp these ideas intellectually, right?
Totally.
But to actually embody them, that takes some serious like courage.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know that he would have an easy answer to that. But if there's one thing I think we can take away from Beyond Good and Evil, it's this. Don't be afraid to question. Question those inherited values.
Yeah.
Question the easy answers. Question your own assumptions. Question your own limitations.
Yeah, because maybe that discomfort, that questioning is where the real growth happens.
Maybe so.
Right. Where we start to move beyond these simple categories of good and evil and really forge something that's our own.
Yeah. And maybe, just maybe, that's what it means to live a life worthy of this noble soul that he talks about.
Well said. That was quite a journey, I think, through Nietzsche's mind.
It's a wild ride.
If you're up for more, and let's be honest, you can never really get enough Nietzsche.
Never enough.
We highly encourage you to check out the source material yourself. It's dense.
Oh, yeah.
It's challenging, but it might just change the way you see the world.
It just might.
Until next time, happy deep diving.